A year after his wife's passing, he went on vacation with his daughter. "Dad, I saw Mom with a man," she said pale-faced on the plane. Jason Miller, a 35-year-old widower, struggled to rebuild his life after the presumed death of his wife, Claire, in a tragic drowning accident off the coast of Cape Cod. It had been a serene summer morning when she decided to swim early, leaving Jason and their 5-year-old daughter, Mia, asleep in their beachside rental. When he woke and found her missing, panic ensued. Despite extensive search efforts, Claire's body was never recovered, leaving Jason trapped in a limbo of grief and unanswered questions. Mia, too young to fully grasp the finality of death, often asked about her mother with a mixture of innocence and confusion. "When is Mommy coming back? Did she really go to heaven?" Her questions pierced Jason's heart like shards of glass, forcing him to confront his own doubts about what truly happened that day. Unable to remain in the house that held memories of Claire's absence, Jason sold their home near the coast and relocated to a modest apartment in suburban Boston. The move was intended to bring closure, but Claire's memory lingered, as persistent as the tide. Jason's nights were plagued by vivid dreams in which Claire reached out to him from cold, dark waters, her voice distant but pleading. He always awoke breathless, haunted by her unspoken message. With his world turned upside down, Jason abandoned his high-profile marketing career to take on freelance graphic design work, allowing him more flexibility to care for Mia. The financial strain was palpable, but Jason found solace in being present for his daughter. She had become his anchor, her innocent laughter the only bright spot in an otherwise bleak existence. Jason tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Mia, taking her to the park, reading bedtime stories, and even attempting to bake cookies, an activity that always ended in chaos. Yet, beneath their shared routines lay an undercurrent of unresolved pain. One evening, as they worked on a puzzle together, Mia looked up and said, "Mommy talks to me in my dreams. She says she's cold and lost. Can we go find her?" Jason froze, the puzzle piece slipping from his fingers. He wanted to dismiss her words as the imaginative musings of a child, but they unearthed a discomforting truth: he, too, had dreamt of Claire. He shrugged off the coincidence, telling himself that Mia's dreams were likely echoes of the stories they'd told about Claire's love for the ocean. But deep down, he felt a growing unease. Could there be more to her disappearance than he had allowed himself to believe? The weeks stretched into months, and Jason focused on maintaining a fragile stability for Mia. His days were a blur of work, errands, and parenting, but his nights remained restless. The apartment they shared was simple but warm, with walls adorned by Mia's colorful drawings. Despite his efforts to create a safe haven, Jason couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that his life was incomplete, like a puzzle missing its most crucial piece. One afternoon, as Jason sifted through a box of old belongings to find something for Mia's school project, he stumbled upon a stack of photos of Claire. In one picture, she was laughing on a beach, her dark hair tousled by the wind. In another, she held a baby Mia close, her smile radiant and full of life. The images were both a comfort and a torment, a stark reminder of what they had lost. Later that evening, as Jason tucked Mia into bed, she looked up at him with her big, curious eyes. "Daddy, do you think Mommy misses us?" Her question caught him off guard. He hesitated before answering. "Of course, sweetheart. She loved us very much." Mia frowned, her small hands gripping the blanket tightly. "Then why can't we find her? What if she's not in heaven? What if she's somewhere else?" Jason's chest tightened. "What do you mean, Mia?" "I don't know," she whispered, avoiding his gaze. "I just feel like she's not really gone." Her words lingered in Jason's mind long after she fell asleep. He had spent the past year trying to accept the narrative everyone around him had insisted on: Claire had drowned, and the sea had claimed her. But the lack of closure, the absence of a body, the strange finality of her disappearance, had always left room for doubt. The following week, Jason took Mia to the local library. While she explored the children's section, he found himself researching missing persons cases. It was a morbid curiosity, fueled by a growing suspicion he couldn't fully articulate. He learned about cases where people were presumed dead but later discovered alive, often starting new lives under different circumstances. "Stop it," he muttered to himself, shutting the book abruptly. This wasn't healthy, and it wasn't fair to Mia. Yet, as they left the library, he couldn't shake the thought, what if Claire hadn't drowned? What if there was more to her disappearance than met the eye? One night, Jason sat at his desk with Claire's phone records, something he had kept after her death but rarely looked at. Most of the numbers were familiar: friends, family, co-workers, but one stood out. It was an international number that had appeared a few times in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. He hadn't noticed it before, or maybe he had chosen to ignore it. Feeling a mix of dread and determination, Jason decided to dig deeper. He called the number, but it rang endlessly before disconnecting. Frustrated but undeterred, he resolved to keep searching. Meanwhile, Mia continued to mention her mother in ways that unsettled Jason. "Mommy was wearing a red dress last night," she said one morning at breakfast. She was smiling, but she didn't say anything. Jason tried to dismiss it as a dream, but the specificity of her words unnerved him. Claire had owned a red dress, a favorite of hers, but Mia hadn't seen it since before her disappearance. As time passed, Jason began to feel like he was standing at the edge of a precipice. His rational mind told him to move forward, to let go of Claire and focus on the life he still had with Mia. But his heart clung to the idea that something wasn't right, that there were questions left unanswered. It wasn't until several months later, on a flight to Florida for a much-needed vacation with Mia, that his world was turned upside down once again. The plane hummed softly as Jason leaned back in his seat, staring out the window. The clouds stretched endlessly below them, their calm appearance at odds with the storm brewing inside him. This trip to Miami had been a spontaneous decision, a chance for him and Mia to escape their routine and make new memories. But as much as he wanted to move forward, the questions about Claire still weighed heavily on his mind. Mia, seated by the window, clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit and kicked her feet lightly against the seat. "Do you think there's a beach where we're going, Daddy?" "Of course," Jason said, forcing a smile. "We'll build the biggest sandcastle anyone's ever seen." She giggled, her excitement momentarily lifting his spirits. Jason reminded himself that this trip was for her as much as it was for him, a chance to give Mia a sense of normalcy and joy that had been scarce since Claire's disappearance. The flight attendant came by with drinks, and Jason took a coffee, grateful for the warmth in his hands. As he sipped, he noticed Mia suddenly sit up straighter, her gaze fixed on the front of the plane. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Mia's voice was barely a whisper. "I saw her, Daddy. Mommy's here." Jason froze, the cup trembling in his hand. "Mia, what do you mean?" "Mommy's not here." She's there," Mia insisted, pointing toward the front of the plane. "She walked past with a man." Jason's stomach churned. He glanced in the direction Mia was pointing but saw nothing unusual, just passengers settling into their seats, chatting or reading. "Honey, maybe you thought you saw someone who looked like her." Mia shook her head firmly. "No, it's her. She looked right at me." Jason didn't know how to respond. He wanted to comfort Mia, to dismiss her claim as a child's overactive imagination, but her certainty unnerved him. The thought that Claire could be alive, on this very plane, was both impossible and terrifying. He stood abruptly, drawing curious looks from nearby passengers. "I'll be right back, Mia. Stay here and don't move, okay?" Mia nodded, her wide eyes filled with a mix of hope and confusion. Jason made his way down the aisle, scanning every face he passed. Most people avoided eye contact, engrossed in their own conversations or devices. When he reached the front of the plane, he paused near the curtain separating the economy cabin from first class. His heart pounded as he debated whether to proceed. "Excuse me, sir," a flight attendant said, stepping in his path. "Can I help you with something?" Jason hesitated, unsure of what to say. I think I saw someone I know up here. My daughter thought she saw her mother." The attendant's brow furrowed. "If you're looking for someone, I can help you check the manifest." Jason shook his head. "No, it's fine. Sorry to bother you." He returned to his seat, feeling foolish and frustrated. Mia looked up at him expectantly, but he couldn't bring himself to tell her that he'd found nothing. As the flight continued, Jason tried to convince himself that Mia's sighting had been a mistake. But when the plane landed in Miami and the passengers began disembarking, something caught his eye. Near the jet bridge, a woman with dark hair stepped into view, walking quickly beside a tall, well-dressed man. Jason's breath hitched. From where he stood, she looked uncannily like Claire, her profile, her walk, even the way she brushed her hair behind her ear. "Mia, stay close," he said, taking her hand and weaving through the crowd. By the time he reached the jet bridge, the woman and her companion were gone, swallowed by the throng of passengers heading toward baggage claim. Jason's pulse raced as he searched the area, but there was no sign of them. "Daddy, was it her?" Mia asked, tugging at his sleeve. Jason knelt to her level, his face taut with emotion. "I don't know, sweetheart. I'm not sure." Mia's expression fell, and Jason felt a pang of guilt for letting her hopes rise. But he couldn't ignore the possibility that she might have been right. As they made their way through the airport, Jason couldn't shake the image of the woman. If it was Claire, what was she doing here? Who was the man with her? And why hadn't she reached out to them if she was alive? Questions swirled in his mind as they retrieved their luggage and headed to their hotel. That night, after Mia fell asleep, Jason sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. He pulled out his phone and began searching for flights from Boston to Miami in the past month, hoping to find some clue, some confirmation that Claire might have been on the plane. But as the hours passed with no answers, Jason realized that this encounter, real or imagined, had reopened wounds he thought he'd begun to heal. And it had also reignited something else, the determination to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. The next morning, Jason woke early, the memory of the previous day still vivid in his mind. Mia was still asleep, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm, but Jason couldn't rest. Something about the woman on the plane haunted him, the way she moved, the flicker of familiarity. He needed answers. Sitting at the small desk in their hotel room, Jason opened his laptop and began searching. He started with the flight they'd taken, trying to find a passenger list or any trace of the people he'd seen. Of course, airline records weren't easily accessible, and his efforts quickly hit a dead end. Frustrated but determined, Jason switched his approach. He searched for missing persons databases, starting with Claire's name. Her case, officially labeled as a presumed death due to drowning, hadn't been revisited since the initial investigation. But Jason now realized how little he had actually questioned the details back then. Why had Claire gone out to swim alone that morning? Why had she chosen a spot known for its dangerous currents? And why was her body never found, even after extensive searches? The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. The Claire he knew was meticulous, cautious, someone who always double-checked weather conditions before venturing out on the water. Her disappearance, though tragic, didn't align with the person he remembered. Mia stirred, rubbing her eyes as she sat up. "Daddy, what are you doing?" Jason quickly closed the laptop and smiled. "Just checking some emails." "How did you sleep?" "Good," she said, but her expression grew serious. "Do you think we'll see Mommy again?" Jason hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "I don't know, Mia. But if she's out there, we'll find her." Satisfied with his answer, Mia slid off the bed and began playing with her toys. Jason watched her, his heart heavy with both hope and fear. Later that afternoon, Jason decided to visit the airport again, hoping to retrace his steps. Mia came along, holding his hand tightly as they navigated the bustling terminals. "Why are we back here?" she asked. "I just need to check something," Jason replied, scanning the crowds for any sign of the woman he'd seen. Near the information desk, he spotted an airline employee and approached her. "Hi, I was on Flight 372 from Boston yesterday. I think I saw someone I know on board but didn't get a chance to speak with them. Is there any way to confirm who was on the flight? The woman gave him a polite but firm smile. I'm sorry, sir, but we can't share passenger information due to privacy policies. Jason nodded, expecting the answer but still disappointed. I understand. Thanks anyway. As they walked away, Mia tugged on his arm. What if we just wait here? Maybe she'll come back. Jason knelt down to her level. Mia, I know you want to see Mommy, but we don't know if that was really her. It might have been someone who just looked like her. Mia frowned but didn't argue. Jason's heart ached, knowing how much she wanted this to be true. That evening, back at the hotel, Jason received an unexpected call. It was from an old friend of Claire's, Nicole, who had heard about their trip to Miami. Jason, it's good to hear your voice, Nicole said warmly. How's Mia doing? She's doing okay, Jason replied. We're trying to enjoy some time away. I'm glad. I was actually calling because I came across something strange the other day. Jason's grip on the phone tightened. What kind of strange? I was flipping through an old photo album and found a picture of Claire with someone I didn't recognize. It looked recent, definitely not from when we were younger. I thought it was odd because I don't remember Claire mentioning him. Jason's pulse quickened. Do you still have the photo? Yes, I can send it to you. I'll text it over now. Moments later, Jason's phone buzzed with a message. He opened it to find a picture of Claire standing beside a man in a suit. Her expression was unreadable, and the setting appeared to be a cafe or restaurant. Jason stared at the image, his mind racing. The man looked vaguely familiar, though Jason couldn't place him. More unsettling was the date stamped in the corner of the photo. It was only a month before Claire's disappearance. Do you know where this was taken? Jason asked Nicole. No idea, she replied. It was mixed in with other photos from a few years ago. I thought you might recognize it. Jason thanked her and ended the call, his thoughts spiraling. Who was the man in the photo? And why had Claire never mentioned him? He glanced at Mia, who was coloring quietly at the table. Jason's resolve hardened. He couldn't let this go, not now. If there was even a chance Claire was alive, he owed it to Mia, and himself, to uncover the truth. Jason sat at the small desk in their hotel room, staring at the picture Nicole had sent. The man standing next to Claire seemed so out of place in her life. Jason racked his brain, trying to recall if she had ever mentioned someone who looked like him, tall, clean-cut, with the air of a businessman. But no name or memory surfaced. His thoughts were interrupted by Mia, who climbed onto his lap with her stuffed rabbit. What are you looking at, Daddy? Jason quickly turned his phone face down. Just some work stuff, sweetheart. She frowned. You're thinking about Mommy again, aren't you? Jason sighed, brushing a hand through her soft curls. I am. But only because I want to make sure we have all the answers we need. Mia tilted her head. Do you think she misses us? The question hit him like a wave. I hope so, he said softly. That night, after Mia had fallen asleep, Jason couldn't stop thinking about the photo. The date on it was only weeks before Claire's disappearance. If it was recent, it meant Claire might have been keeping secrets. The thought unsettled him. He opened his laptop and began searching for information on the man in the photo. Using public records and social media, he scoured every possible lead. It was slow and tedious, but finally, a breakthrough, a local news article about a real estate developer in Boston. The article included a picture of the man, older, with graying hair, but undeniably the same one standing next to Claire in the photo. His name was Daniel Foster. Jason's chest tightened. Why had Claire been meeting with a man like Daniel? The man's biography on his company's website revealed he was a prominent figure in luxury developments, often traveling for work. Could Claire have been involved with him professionally, or was it something more personal? Jason's hands trembled as he typed Daniel's name into an email search, and to his shock, an old email from Claire to Daniel popped up in her archived messages. It was short and vague. Subject: meeting details. Daniel. I'll be at the usual spot tomorrow at 3. Let me know if there's any change. Claire. Jason felt a pang of betrayal. Who was this man to her? What was this usual spot, and why hadn't she ever mentioned him? The next morning, Jason and Mia ventured out to explore Miami. He tried to act normal for her sake, taking her to a nearby park and buying her ice cream. But his mind remained preoccupied with the discovery. As they sat on a bench overlooking a fountain, Mia suddenly pointed toward a group of people walking by. "Daddy, that lady looks like Mommy." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He followed her gaze, but the woman she pointed to only bore a passing resemblance to Claire. Her hair was darker, and her walk was different. Jason forced a smile. "I don't think that's her, Mia. But you're really good at spotting people who look like her." Mia frowned but didn't press further. Later that day, Jason decided to take a bold step. He reached out to Daniel Foster using the contact information from his company's website. Posing as someone interested in a development project, he requested a meeting, hoping to confront the man in person. To Jason's surprise, Daniel's assistant responded within hours, scheduling a meeting for the following afternoon at a cafe near the city center. Jason felt a mix of anxiety and determination as he prepared for the encounter. The next day, Jason left Mia in the care of a trusted hotel babysitter and headed to the cafe. It was a sleek, modern space with large windows and minimalist decor. Jason arrived early, choosing a table where he could see the entrance. When Daniel Foster walked in, Jason's pulse quickened. The man was just as he appeared in the photo, polished and confident, his presence commanding attention. Jason waited until Daniel ordered his coffee and sat down before approaching. "Mr. Foster?" Jason said, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. Daniel looked up, surprised. "Yes, can I help you?" Jason slid the photo across the table, his hands shaking slightly. "I think you can. Do you know this woman?" Daniel's expression shifted, his confident demeanor faltering as he studied the photo. He leaned back, his jaw tightening. "Who are you?" "I'm Jason Miller. That's my wife in the photo. She disappeared a year ago, and I need to know what you know about her." For a moment, Daniel said nothing, his face unreadable. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Listen, I don't know who you are or what you think happened, but I suggest you let this go." Jason's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, let this go? What aren't you telling me?" Daniel stood abruptly, sliding the photo back across the table. "I don't have anything to say to you. Stay out of things you don't understand." As Daniel walked out of the cafe, Jason sat frozen, the implications of the encounter sinking in. Whatever Daniel knew, it was clear he wasn't going to talk. But Jason wasn't about to stop now. Jason walked out of the cafe, the picture clenched in his hand. The encounter with Daniel Foster left him rattled but more determined than ever. The man's reaction hadn't been one of confusion or innocence, it was defensive, even threatening. Jason couldn't ignore the feeling that Daniel knew something about Claire's disappearance, something significant. Back at the hotel, Mia greeted him with a big hug, her smile momentarily lifting the weight on his shoulders. "Did you find anything about Mommy?" she asked eagerly. Jason hesitated, not wanting to burden her with false hope or the complexities of the situation. "Not yet, sweetheart. But I'm working on it." Mia nodded, seemingly satisfied, and went back to her coloring book. Jason sat down at the desk, opening his laptop again to dig deeper. He typed "Daniel Foster scandals" into the search bar, hoping to uncover anything that might connect him to Claire. The results were surprisingly sparse. Daniel's reputation was pristine, his career celebrated in articles praising his architectural achievements. Still, Jason felt certain that beneath the polished exterior, there was more to the man. As he scrolled, one link caught his eye, a forum post titled "Unfinished Business: Secrets Behind Foster's Empire." The post was from an anonymous user claiming that Daniel's success was built on shady dealings, including offshore accounts and questionable partnerships. Jason skimmed through the thread, noting that most comments dismissed the claims as baseless conspiracy theories. But one reply stood out. It mentioned a private investigator who had allegedly uncovered dirt on Foster before mysteriously dropping the case. Jason's curiosity was piqued. If there was any truth to these claims, he needed to find that investigator. The next day, Jason hired a babysitter to take Mia to the aquarium while he followed this new lead. He contacted the private investigator, a man named Garrett Hayes, and arranged a meeting at a small diner on the outskirts of the city. Garrett was a grizzled man in his late 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through Jason. As they sat down, Jason wasted no time. "I need information about Daniel Foster," Jason said, sliding the photo of Claire and Daniel across the table. Garrett's eyes narrowed as he studied the picture. "Haven't heard that name in a while," he said, leaning back in his seat. "Why are you looking into him?" Jason hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "My wife disappeared over a year ago. I think she might have been involved with him somehow, and I need to know what happened." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous trail you're on, friend. Foster doesn't play fair, and he's got resources to bury problems, literally and figuratively." Jason's stomach tightened, but he pressed on. "Do you know anything about him? Anything that could help me?" The investigator tapped his fingers on the table, as if weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. "I looked into him a few years back for a client, someone who claimed Foster screwed them over in a business deal. What I found wasn't pretty. Offshore accounts, fake companies, bribes to government officials to push through shady building permits. The guy's got skeletons in his closet, no doubt about it." Jason leaned forward, his voice urgent. "But what about personal connections? Have you heard of him being involved with women?" Garrett sighed, scratching his stubbled chin. "There were rumors. Foster's been known to have affairs, and not all of them consensual. He's a manipulator. If your wife was tangled up with him, there's a good chance she got in deeper than she realized." Jason's hands balled into fists under the table. The idea of Claire being coerced or manipulated by Daniel filled him with a rage he hadn't felt in years. "Do you have proof?" Jason asked. Garrett shook his head. "I had files, but Foster caught wind of my digging. He made my client drop the case, and I wasn't about to keep poking the bear. Guys got powerful friends." Jason slumped back in his seat, feeling both frustrated and helpless. Garrett studied him for a moment before leaning in. "Look," he said, his tone softer, "if you're serious about this, there's one place you might want to check. Foster has a private property outside of Orlando. It's not on any public records, but I found it during my investigation. High security, no reason for a guy like him to need that kind of isolation unless he's hiding something." Jason's heart raced. This was the first concrete lead he'd gotten. "How do I find it?" Garrett scribbled an address on a napkin and slid it across the table. "Be careful, though. Foster doesn't like visitors." Jason returned to the hotel feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He spent the evening preparing, mapping out a plan to visit Foster's property while Mia stayed with the babysitter. As he tucked Mia into bed, she looked up at him with her big, trusting eyes. "Are you going to find Mommy tomorrow?" Jason kissed her forehead, his voice steady. "I'm going to do everything I can." But as he sat awake that night, staring at the address Garrett had given him, doubt began to creep in. Was he prepared for what he might find? If Claire was alive, what would she say? And if she wasn't, could he handle knowing the truth? Jason clenched his fists. Whatever lay ahead, he owed it to Mia, and to himself, to see this through. The morning air was thick with tension as Jason drove toward the address Garrett had provided. The road became narrower the farther he went, winding through dense trees that formed a canopy overhead. He gripped the wheel tightly, the sound of gravel crunching under the tires matching the rhythm of his racing heart. He had left Mia with the hotel babysitter again, promising her they would explore Miami together that afternoon. The guilt of leaving her behind gnawed at him, but he couldn't risk bringing her along on what he feared might be a dangerous venture. After nearly 2 hours of driving, Jason spotted a heavy metal gate at the end of the road. Beyond it, a long driveway disappeared into the trees. A discreet plaque near the gate read "Private property, no trespassing." Jason parked a short distance away, killing the engine. He sat in the car for a moment, trying to steady his nerves. The gate was imposing, but Garrett had mentioned it was likely monitored by cameras. Getting caught here would raise alarms, and Jason wasn't sure what kind of response Foster, or whoever might be inside, would have to an uninvited visitor. Jason grabbed a pair of binoculars from his backpack and stepped out of the car. Keeping to the tree line, he approached the gate cautiously, scanning the area. There was no visible activity, but a security camera mounted high on a post confirmed Garrett's warning. Foster was serious about keeping this place secluded. Determined not to turn back, Jason walked along the perimeter of the property, looking for a way in. After about 20 minutes of searching, he found a section of the fence partially obscured by overgrown bushes. The metal bars were rusted and bent, creating a narrow gap just wide enough for him to squeeze through. Jason hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. The forest was silent except for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Steeling himself, he slipped through the gap, his pulse pounding. The driveway stretched for what felt like miles, flanked by towering trees that cast long shadows across the path. Jason kept to the edge, moving as quietly as possible. Eventually, the trees gave way to an open clearing, revealing a sprawling modern estate. The house was a stark contrast to its secluded surroundings, with sleek glass walls and sharp architectural angles. Jason crouched behind a row of hedges, observing the scene. 2 black SUVs were parked near the entrance, and a man in a security uniform patrolled the grounds with a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. Jason's eyes were drawn to the house's upper level, where a figure passed briefly behind one of the large windows. His breath caught. Was it her? His heart thudded as he debated his next move. Charging in wasn't an option, he'd be caught before he even reached the front door. Instead, he decided to circle around the house, hoping to find another way in. The back of the property was less guarded, with no visible security cameras or patrols. Jason spotted a smaller entrance, a sliding glass door that led to what appeared to be a living area. It was locked, but a gardening tool left nearby provided a makeshift lever to force it open. Once inside, Jason froze, listening for any sounds. The house was eerily quiet, the only noise the faint hum of an air conditioning unit. He moved cautiously, stepping into a large open-plan living room filled with expensive furniture and abstract artwork. Jason's eyes fell on a framed photo sitting on a side table. His breath hitched as he picked it up. It was a picture of Claire. She was smiling, her hair pulled back, looking happier than Jason had seen her in years. But the man standing beside her wasn't him, it was Daniel Foster. The sound of footsteps upstairs snapped Jason out of his trance. He quickly set the photo down and moved toward the staircase, his heart hammering in his chest. He ascended slowly, careful to avoid creaking steps. On the second floor, Jason followed the sound of muffled voices coming from a room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and he peered through the crack, his stomach twisting at what he saw. Claire was there, sitting in a chair near the window. She looked thinner, her face more angular than he remembered, but it was undeniably her. She was speaking softly to someone, Daniel Foster, who stood across from her with his arms crossed. Jason strained to hear their conversation. "We've been careful," Claire was saying, her tone anxious. "But I can't keep hiding like this. It's not fair to Mia." "You made your choice," Daniel replied coldly. "You wanted out, and I gave you away. If you go back now, everything we built falls apart." Jason's mind reeled. Everything they built? What did that mean? Before he could process what he was hearing, the floorboard under his foot creaked. Claire and Daniel both turned sharply toward the door. "Who's there?" Daniel barked, his voice icy. Jason's instinct took over. He pushed the door open, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. Claire. Her face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. Jason? Daniel moved between them, his posture tense. You shouldn't be here. Ignoring him, Jason locked eyes with Claire. You're alive. After all this time, you're alive. Why, Claire? Why did you leave us? Tears welled in her eyes as she stood, her hands trembling. Jason. I can explain. Daniel's voice cut through the tension. You need to leave. Now. Jason clenched his fists. Not until I get answers. The confrontation had begun, and Jason knew he wouldn't leave without the truth, no matter the cost. The room seemed to shrink as Jason stood face to face with Claire for the first time in over a year. His heart pounded as conflicting emotions surged within him, anger, relief, confusion. Claire looked fragile but resolute, her eyes darting nervously between Jason and Daniel. Jason, she said softly, her voice trembling. You shouldn't have come here. Jason took a step forward, his fists clenched. I shouldn't have come? Claire, I spent the past year grieving you, telling Mia her mother was gone. Do you know what that did to her? To me? Claire's eyes filled with tears, but Daniel stepped between them, his tone sharp. That's enough. Claire owes you nothing. Jason turned his glare on Daniel. Stay out of this. I'm not here for you. The tension in the room was electric. Claire raised her hands, her voice breaking. Stop it, both of you. She moved closer to Jason, her gaze pleading. Jason, I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I thought I was protecting you and Mia. Protecting us? Jason's voice was raw with disbelief. By disappearing? By letting us believe you were dead? Claire looked down, her hands twisting nervously. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. I thought I'd figure out a way to come back once things settled. What things, Claire? Jason demanded. What could possibly justify this? She hesitated, glancing at Daniel, who remained silent but watchful. Finally, she exhaled shakily. There were mistakes I made. Financial ones. People I got involved with who weren't who I thought they were. I owed money, more than I could pay back. When they started threatening you and Mia, I panicked. Daniel offered me a way out. Jason stared at her, his mind reeling. You faked your death because of debts? You didn't trust me enough to help you? Tears streamed down Claire's face. I was scared, Jason. They weren't just threats, they were real. Daniel had the resources to make it all go away, but the price was starting over. Jason shook his head, his voice filled with bitterness. So you just walked away from us? From Mia? She asks about you every day, Claire. She dreams about you. Do you know what it's like to tell your daughter her mother is gone while you're out here, playing house with him? He pointed at Daniel, whose jaw tightened but who said nothing. Claire flinched, her hands trembling. I thought it was the only way to keep you both safe. If I'd stayed, they would have come for you, too. Jason felt his anger falter, replaced by a cold ache in his chest. You should have trusted me. We could have faced it together. But instead, you left us with nothing but questions and pain. Daniel stepped forward, his tone clipped. You've said what you needed to say. Now it's time for you to leave. Jason turned to him, his voice low and dangerous. I'm not going anywhere until I know my daughter is safe. If you think I'm just going to walk away now, you don't know me. Claire placed a hand on Jason's arm, her touch hesitant. Please, Jason. You found me. That's enough. Go home to Mia and let this end here. Jason pulled away, his voice rising. It's not enough. Mia deserves her mother. I deserve answers. And you, he looked at Daniel with disdain. You don't get to decide what happens next. Daniel's expression darkened. You're out of your depth. Walk away while you still can. Jason refused to back down. What are you hiding? Why are you so invested in this? What else has she sacrificed to stay in your good graces? Claire stepped between them, her voice breaking. Jason, stop. Please. This isn't helping. But Jason's questions hung in the air, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone in the room. Claire's silence spoke volumes, and Jason's mind raced with possibilities. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from downstairs, and a voice called out. Mr. Foster, everything okay up there? Daniel's posture stiffened, and he exchanged a glance with Claire. We're fine, he called back, but his tone was strained. Jason realized he was outnumbered and likely outmatched if things escalated. He stepped back, his fists still clenched. This isn't over, he said, his voice steady. You owe Mia, and me, more than this. Claire looked at him, her face etched with pain. I'll find a way to explain everything, Jason. I promise. Just, go now. For Mia's sake. Jason hesitated, his instinct screaming at him to stay and fight for more answers. But the look in Claire's eyes, a mix of guilt, fear, and pleading, made him falter. He turned and walked out of the room, his heart heavy with unresolved questions. As he made his way out of the house, the weight of the confrontation settled over him like a storm cloud. Back in the car, Jason gripped the steering wheel tightly, staring at the dirt road ahead. Claire was alive, but the reunion he'd dreamed of wasn't what he'd hoped for. She was hiding something, something that went beyond debts and threats. For Mia's sake, Jason knew he couldn't stop now. He needed the full truth, no matter how painful it might be. As the car rumbled to life, Jason made a silent vow: he would protect Mia, uncover what had truly happened, and ensure that neither Daniel nor anyone else could take away what little remained of his family. Jason parked his car outside the Boston police station, his mind racing. In the days following his confrontation with Claire and Daniel, he'd worked tirelessly, piecing together everything he'd uncovered. Armed with Garrett's insights, the photo, and emails between Claire and Daniel, Jason had compiled enough evidence to take to the authorities. The detective assigned to the case, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Harper, listened intently as Jason laid everything out. Her expression shifted from skepticism to concern as the scope of Daniel Foster's manipulation became clear. If what you're saying checks out, this could lead to a major investigation, Harper said, flipping through the documents Jason had provided. But it's going to take time, and it won't be easy. Foster has a lot of influence. Jason leaned forward, his voice steady. I don't care how long it takes. He's been controlling Claire, and threatening my family, for too long. It has to end. Harper nodded. We'll do everything we can. But you need to be prepared. People like Foster don't go down quietly. The plan unfolded quickly. Using Claire's willingness to cooperate, the authorities set a trap to catch Daniel in the act of laundering money. Claire, wearing a wire, arranged a meeting with Daniel under the guise of discussing their business. Jason insisted on being nearby, despite the risks, his need to protect Claire and Mia outweighing his fear. The meeting took place at a luxury hotel downtown. Jason, watching from a surveillance van with Detective Harper and her team, felt his pulse quicken as Claire entered the room with Daniel. Are you sure this is safe? Jason asked Harper, his hands clenched into fists. We've got agents in position, she reassured him. If anything goes wrong, we'll move in immediately. Inside, Claire maintained her composure as she faced Daniel. The wire captured every word. You look nervous, Daniel said, his tone cold and calculating. Claire forced a small smile. This situation isn't exactly easy. I just want to make sure everything's settled before anyone starts asking questions. Daniel studied her, his eyes narrowing. You've been different lately. Are you sure there's nothing you're not telling me? Jason held his breath, watching the exchange on the monitor. He could see the tension in Claire's posture, the way her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a glass of water. Of course not, Claire replied, her voice steady despite the fear Jason knew she must be feeling. "I just want this to be over." Daniel leaned back, his suspicion evident. "It will be. As long as you remember where your loyalties lie." Moments later, he handed her a flash drive containing encrypted files, a key piece of evidence linking him to his illegal activities. As soon as the transaction was complete, the authorities moved in, arresting Daniel and his associates before they had a chance to react. With Daniel in custody, the full extent of his crimes began to unravel. His empire, built on manipulation and corruption, collapsed as investigators uncovered years of fraudulent dealings. Claire's cooperation proved instrumental, but it came at a cost. At the trial, Claire faced scrutiny for her role in Daniel's schemes. While her testimony helped secure a conviction, she was not immune to consequences. The judge acknowledged her cooperation and the coercion she endured, sentencing her to probation, mandatory counseling instead of jail time. Jason, watching from the gallery with Mia at his side, felt a mixture of relief and lingering anger. Claire's choices had fractured their family, but her courage in exposing Daniel showed she was trying to make amends. Months later, Jason and Claire sat together at a park, watching Mia play on the swings. The awkward silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. "I know I hurt you," Claire said quietly. "And I know it'll take time to rebuild what I broke. But I want to try, for Mia, and for us." Jason looked at her, his expression guarded. "I can't promise things will ever go back to the way they were. But Mia needs her mother. And maybe, we can figure out what's next." Claire nodded, her eyes glistening. "That's all I ask." As Jason walked with Mia to the car, she tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, do you think Mommy will stay this time?" Jason knelt down, meeting her gaze. "I think she's going to do her best. And so will I." Mia smiled, wrapping her arms around him. Jason held her close, a sense of hope stirring within him for the first time in what felt like forever. While the scars of the past would never fully fade, Jason knew they could heal. Together, he, Claire, and Mia would build something new, something stronger.